Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Welcome everybody to round 4 of NZSDC 2026. Congratulations to both teams for making it this far. The info slide for today's motion is NA. The motion is this House would introduce performance-based pay for teachers. You will know this already, but speaking times are 7 to 8 minutes. You'll hear one ding like this at 1 minute to signal the start of POIs, one ding again at 7 minutes to signal the end, 2 dings at 8, 3 dings at 8:15. If you continue talking after, I guess it'll just keep dinging. Leavers applies at half that, so 1 ding at 3, 2 dings at 4, and without further ado, welcome up to the first speaker.
After the speech concludes, you, judge, will be convinced that education will now be a bay of plenty of opportunities for our most vulnerable kids. 3 things in this speech. Firstly, on setup and our model. Secondly, on how it attracts good new teachers. And thirdly, how it improves the current teaching climate. Okay, firstly, in setup, our model. Our model comes in 2 parts. Firstly, what it looks like and how it's going to work. We bring you 2 things here. Firstly, it's going to look like a pay bracket using the current ladder of teacher pay. However, it's going to be based on performance rather than time, experience, or hierarchy within the teaching system. An additional thing that we're going to add to this is that first year teachers are going to start with a fixed first year teacher pay that is slightly above the bottom of the ladder. Note that by doing this, we don't alienate new, more inexperienced teachers, and we're going to fix a problem that is massive in the status quo right now, and these new teachers are going to be effectively subsidized, right? Okay, how is performance going to be determined? 3 things here. Firstly, it's going to be broadly done by a board of advisors that are formed by a group of high-ranking teachers and university teaching trainers / education researchers from each area. These teachers are going to be delegated to a school that they don't have affiliation to in the area, and they're going to perform routine in-class checks and sit-ins on teachers, and that's going to guide their the main bulk of their evaluation, right? There's 2 other metrics here. Firstly, by grades, and secondly by parent feedback. However, we tell you that the grades thing is going to be plotted against the kid's own performance, so it's going to if there's a significant dip in their performance, that might flag something. And secondly, by parent feedback, which is just going to be a termly form or something like that. However, we tell you that these 2 ways don't completely guide the decision making of this advisory panel. However, it's likely just to flag points of interest for the advisors to actually be able to make educated decisions and go and further explore things. Okay, some preemptive rebuttal on why this is going to logistically be possible. Well, we tell you 2 things. Firstly, at the point in time the government enacts a policy like this, they're likely to care about education, which means they're likely to want to divert funds and resources into education, right? And secondly, we tell you that it's not going to be a huge logistical issue because A, it uses people that are already in existing jobs, so you don't have to source a whole bunch of new government employees. And secondly, it's not going to be hugely costly over what is already being used, right? Okay, so further point and set up on what teachers look like and why the environment is likely to be collaborative and not competitive. Well, we tell you that teachers are typically personable people and quite passionate about about what they do. They're going to want to improve pay, so they're going to likely help each other and want to swap and share resources and make the environment quite conducive for development and things like that. And any teachers caught sabotaging will end up being actively trying to decrease the pay of other teachers are likely to be very, very easily caught out by these advisors and booted out of their career quite swiftly. Okay, firstly, how does this attract new good teachers? Firstly, some framing. The first point of framing here is that teaching, like at the moment, isn't massively monetarily attractive. Like most people join it out of like love of the game, out of passion, right? Secondly, despite passion, a lot of young talented teachers are not looked after by the system, and many of them may either start working less hard or drop out entirely because they're not encouraged to keep developing as teachers, right? Because they might not be as experienced, they're not going to be paid the same amount, and they're not going to be incentivized to continue rising their way up in the system. They're going to feel alienated, they're going to feel horrible. Okay, why are the teachers attracted? 3 reasons here. Firstly, there's obviously just going to be an additional financial incentive for new teachers, as I gave to you at setup. Secondly, they're not going to be stuck at the bottom, and they're going to be rewarded on merit and rewarded on how well and quickly they move up the system and how good of a teacher they end up converging to be, which is going to do 2 things. A, make it more attractive to join as they can see possibilities for where their career can go. And secondly, it's going to make it exceptionally attractive to stay, which we tell you is an exclusive benefit on our side of the house, because otherwise in the status quo, they would be completely alienated. And thirdly, as per setup, teaching culture is likely to be very kind of improvement focused and quite nice, and therefore teaching is made more attractive for these new teachers to get into, right? Okay, what are the outcomes here? Firstly, well, there's just going to be a further incentive to fill a void of teachers with new teachers, which is going to mean there are more teachers, there are more, class sizes can shrink, kids are able to get more time face-to-face with their teacher, learning improves, because this is a major thing, right, in teaching, that face-to-face interaction has studies shown to it that it is going to make it better. However, we can claim an exclusive benefit on our side of the house, that we tell you that newer teachers are going to be able to better understand the kids' wants and needs of the time, and this especially comes out in things like neurodiversity and things that where current teaching curricula at university is able to much more accurately actually advise people how to deal with and how to do things. So therefore, we're going to have much better teaching for vulnerable kids. Say there's this kid that has dyslexia who's struggling his way through a class with an old man as his teacher, but suddenly if he gets this one-on-one face-to-face time with this new better teacher, they're likely to be able to develop, they're likely to be able to show that what they have with them isn't something that they should be ashamed of, it's something they should be proud of, and something that they should be willing to continue going with. Note that this is an exclusive benefit on our side of the house, because we on our side of the house ensure these teachers actually stay in the system, unlike the status quo, which completely alienates them and cuts them out of the system altogether. So the weighing here is, it's quite intuitive, but there's firstly, there's the vulnerable kids. When they're a vulnerable group, they're likely to be shoved out, and when they are impacted, the impacts are absolutely humongous, right? And secondly, the depth of impact. If more kids are getting face-on-face time with teachers, that's obviously going to be very good for the kids because their learning is going to improve, and I'll explain why that's better in the next point. But before I move on, I'll take POI.
If in order to be adequately paid when working with vulnerable kids, you need to have this opportunity cost of further educating yourself, why would people then be incentivized to help these vulnerable kids?
Could you repeat that?
If in order to be adequately paid for your job when working with vulnerable kids, you're having to go through extra education to understanding these kids, why would you be incentivized to want to work with them?
I think the thing is I characterize through that point that likely at the moment teacher education is likely to look like a lot more things for neurodiverse kids, because that is something that is really, really pressing in the time today. So it's not going to have this massive opportunity cost that you talk about. But secondly, my main substantive point on how it improves current teachers, 2 pieces of framing. Firstly, currently many teachers who have been in the system for a while are lazy or don't perform well and receive good high pay based on time experience, right? And secondly, because their pay stays relatively good or gets better as they accumulate more years, they have no incentives to get better under the status quo, right? 3 reasons here. Firstly, people like money, so they're going to be incentivized to improve. They're going to be given a tangible thing to help them improve. Secondly, there's potential, because there's the bar for the the newer teachers, there could be potential embarrassment for long-time teachers who go through and are of lower paying, so they're going to be likely to want to not be embarrassed by this. And thirdly, there's the schools are more developmentally focused, right? And there's going to be a culture fostered that's going to allow for improvement. 3 outcomes here. Firstly, lazy teachers stop being lazy, they get better, and then or if they keep being lazy, their pay drops and then they leave their job. Teachers learn new methods of improvement, which in turn improves education, and therefore when you have better teachers, education is generally going to improve. Kids' lives are going to be better. They're going to be better. They're going to get into better jobs. They're going to integrate into society more successfully, and overall, we get get a better society for the kids these days and the future of our world. Thank you.
Awesome. I thank the first affirmative speaker for their speech, and whenever the first negative is up, everybody, I invite them up to start off their team's case.
We don't pay a doctor based on his patient survival. We entrust them to do their job to the best of their ability. Why should this not be the same for already underpaid, overworked teachers? A few things in the speech, firstly on setup, secondly on teachers, and then thirdly on the quality of learning. Okay, what does performance-based pay look like? Firstly, the Ministry of Education passes and implements performance-based pay. And secondly, they create a system that assesses the performance of their student. This looks like A, assessing students' progress during their schooling. We think this probably happens to quite a high degree because it's really a big indicator of how the student is doing. It's an indicator of whether the student is passing the year or not. This is means they're likely to take it into a higher account. But B, they have reviews by professionals. This is what Affirmative proposed. I think there's a few flaws with this because note, with the amount of schools we have and the amount of understaffed schools we already have, I don't know where we're pulling out these professionals to do routine checks on all these schools who are highly qualified. It's likely that 1, this doesn't happen, 2, this happens occasionally, but 3, these so-called professionals are not to the standard that AF claims they would be. Thirdly, we also agree that we likely are to have the same budget we have now. If in the status quo, teacher strikes won't push teachers to have higher pay and the government isn't willing to allocate this funding, it is likely the funding towards the school system stays the same. Teacher-based pay is just the reallocation of how this is how this money is used. So what is our counterfactual? I think we stick with the status quo where teachers get a flat pay dictated by A, their skills and qualifications, B, experiences, and C, extra duties, e.g. head of department or your coach of the football team or something, so you get more opportunities. Note also that these review-based systems allow more opportunity for flaws. But before I move into my point, teachers aren't necessarily always liked by parents. This could be because of things like internalized bias. A white suburban mum might think that her son's Hispanic math teacher isn't a very good teacher because she's racist and not because of his actual teaching style. But also, they like take what the
Yeah, why?
kids tell them to an extent and like maybe extremify it. Like a kid may come home from school and say the reason why he got a bad grade was because his teacher was bad and not because he was like playing cool math games in class. But also, I think the like types of teaching in different areas like varies. I think this is where we like flip a lot of their material on how they are better for underprivileged kids and better for kids with different learning needs, because I think this doesn't manifest in the same way as when we're having routine checks. Like a kid with autism might not look engaged with like class in the same way like other kids are, and this means that like the teacher who is actually catering to this kid's needs do not get recognised because this isn't apparent. It looks like these kids with learning disabilities not getting catered to, or like the lesson plan just getting ticked off, and like they're like, oh, your lesson plan's good, so we'll move on. Okay, but how does this now actively negatively impact teachers? Like being a teacher is a hard job. One, you're underpaid. Like the average teacher does so much work for the amount of time they get paid, which leads me to secondly, you're like very overworked. You're at school like 8 to 4 on the account that like you don't have an early morning training you're running, or in like an after school tutoring session you're like hosting, and then you're going home and you're marking work and you're writing a lesson plan for like the next day. But like thirdly, they just like really care about the cause. They're either A, interested in the subject, and or B, care about the teachers. So why does performance-based pay actively harm these teachers? Firstly, it's less certain pay. You don't know what your paycheck will be next week. You don't know what all this time and energy you are putting in is going to pay off. I think this means that a lot of teachers just overcompensate the amount of work they are putting in to ensure they have a good wage. They spend weeks writing their lesson plan to make sure, like, even though like it might have taken half a week to get everyone in the class like really good marks. But it like looks like putting in so much work to literally just be earning just enough to survive. Like you are living in most cases, in some severe cases, like paycheck to paycheck. Like know that one of the biggest benefits of the teachers is that you get these holiday breaks. And now like teachers are more likely to be working through the time off they are like get because they need to ensure they can put food on the table next week.
POI.
But secondly, you put a price on passion. Like a teacher isn't going to take a kid out for these hands-on practical experiments as claims when it's much more safer to make them reread the textbook and like make sure they get all the answers memorized for the quiz next week. This means that while their marks might be slightly worse, on our side we actually have better understanding of the learning. But B, a passionate teacher does not get rewarded for their actions. Like, you work yourself to the ground to help and be a mentor to underprivileged kids. And there are other factors involved. One, maybe they just don't achieve to the same level because they don't have the same external factors like tutors and stuff that will help them succeed. But also two, your teaching style might just be different to cater to this, and this isn't recognised by this panel that judges your teaching. But thirdly, I think you just feel disempowered. I think there's only so much you can do to teach kids, only so much you can do to make them turn up to class. When you have a class that ditches and you have no way to get these kids actually to school, and this is reflected on your paycheck, on your teaching, you are just disincentivized with the system. You're angry at the principal for not giving you a good class. You're angry at yourself that fate has thrown this hard stick your way. But fourthly, there is just competition. Note that they say that they're going to put measures in place to stop sabotage. I think this doesn't necessarily exist on the same scale of actively sabotaging other people. I think it exists on the scale that maybe a teacher writes a lesson plan and doesn't actively go out of their way to share it or compare because they know if they do, another individual might not to give it them back to them, and that sets them ahead. But I think it also just looks like you just deflect your own internal I didn't get as much pay as this other teacher, and it just tenses relationships. This means teachers burn out. They're overworked trying to make a living wage. No, they've got a degree, they've worked hard, they've got a student loan. They spend all night writing lesson plans just to wake up the next day exhausted and not be able to teach and not reflect that. They can't pay their rent. They fall into these cycles. But also I think this learning itself does not actually increase. I think progress is too subjective. Like, sure, you have things like objective like math, but things like English are subject to subconscious bias. A teacher wants to believe they've taught their class well, and this is when they now grade them higher than they actually are because they want their paycheck, but also because they want to, like, whether this is subconscious or conscious or not. But I also think like progress isn't linear, and it disincentivizes people to go to lower privileged areas, help these kids who actually need help, but instead rather focus on like trying to get the best class you like can get, or like go to the school that has the most kids who are already set to achieve and like make benefits on this. But I also think like when you have like this system that is burnt out and stressed, open to exploitation, and like you have these teachers who are just struggling, this is when you actually can't have good teaching, when these teachers are in such state of like constant cycles of trying to make it to the next week just to get their paycheck. This is why the moon shells fall.
Great, I thank the first negative speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the second.
Three things to do in my speech. Firstly, on framing. Secondly, on how teaching improves. And lastly, on sort of the outcomes and impacting compared to the comparative of the status quo. So firstly, on some framing. And I think the framing that we give you is very realistic. It is realistic to do. But I think I'll quickly engage with sort of these attempts to try and shut it down. I think the first thing I'll engage with is the idea that these metrics aren't useful, or aren't really that proper. But I think at the point in time that I think the fact that all these metrics work together are generally a very good indication, because you don't use just one. Because I think I'll engage with it each separately. I think the first point on grades. I think grades is done I think grades are a good indicator that students are doing well and badly in class, especially when you consider their improvement, right? Because grades are likely done sort of as a general consideration over the average on how each student has improved or not improved based on their scores that they end up getting. So if it looks like a student is now suddenly dropped in grades, suddenly no longer doing well, but that might not necessarily be the teacher's fault. But if the whole class has dropped in grades, are suddenly beginning to fall behind, I think that is a pretty clear indicator that a teacher is not doing their job properly. I think secondly here as well, on parents, I think parents do care a lot about the teachers that are teaching their students, but also understand that their students might not necessarily enjoy their teachers. So I think great parents do end up actually giving good indications on what they think their student is like. But I also think they hear a lot from the student and whether they enjoy the classes or whether they are doing good in the classes. I think parents do take all of this into account. They can make mature decisions, but ultimately, generally, they are likely to be a low indicator out of all of these factors. And then lastly, on the professionals, right? Where are these professionals? Schools are understaffed already. Where do we get them? Well, I think teachers, when learning how to be teachers at Teachers College, already receive supervision when they are trying to get accredited to become proper teachers. I think the existence of that already proves that there are systems in place that can analyze, that can supervise, that you can send supervision out. But I think secondly here as well, the fact that we can get high accredited, high bracketed experienced teachers that can maybe can move into these roles because there's that incentive. These roles are likely to be, a specialized high paying. I think that creates incentives for not only for teachers to get into these high bracket roles, but I think it does create areas for these roles to grow, for professionals and areas to be filled. And so that's why our bracket does work. And I think there's a second way we went here, because even if you don't agree that the system becomes massively indicative, I think the system does become more efficient, because if you can at least manage if we can at least prove to you that bad teachers who have stayed in the job for ages but slacked off, like in the current status quo, can be properly paid instead of deserving of what they teach, and not how long they have been in the game, like in the status quo, right? Because we gave you that currently in the status quo, under young teachers, new teachers into the game, start at ground zero, right? They have to work their way up the ranks. They have to, quote unquote, be in the game for longer. But that's really dangerous because, one, you lower the incentive for new teachers to get into the game. But secondly, teachers that are now in the game, that are now at the highest paying brackets because they've been in the system for so long, can just slack off and just do what they like. And I think this system in itself is very inefficient. And that's the second way we win here, because of the fact that the status quo currently doesn't properly pay teachers what they should be getting paid. And I think there is incentives and there are flaws in the status quo that need to be solved with this model. Okay, firstly then, on why teachers do have financial incentive to improve their teaching. Why good teachers do improve their teaching. So what do good teachers look like? And I think teachers can look like in a couple of ways. I think teachers that properly engage a class, where the class pays attention, where the class works in groups. Yes, this can mean experiments if the class is being engaged, if the class is learning from the content. I think the best teachers learn how to balance all of such so that they get good, happy students, but then they also get good grades. But I think teachers as well can help students feel more content as well. Maybe that be mentoring them or inspiring them to love a subject. And I think teachers that do this can also teach the content well. And I think these factors are the ones that means that you have good teachers, because you do get those good grades, but you also get general class attitude to be happier and feedback, and usually you'll get those good teachers. And so I think this is why you can weigh these, why you can accurately predict these good teachers. But I think what this means to the debate is that the good teachers can create benefits, can be incentivized, and can be properly measured. And I think, what do we sort of get here? I think teachers are incentivized to work hard, but also properly engage classes, to properly create lesson plans, to properly connect with students on all of these different levels, on creating all of these different outcomes that we tell you. Because passionate, striving teachers will likely be able to fulfill the criteria I just told you before. Because passionate teachers are willing to connect to those students on one-on-one levels, are willing to spend time to make fun lessons, to make experiments that not only make the class fun, but also teach you new things. I think teachers, when given this monetary incentive to perform better, will take the given opportunity, especially if the risk of losing their salary because they've slacked off, because they are no longer paying attention to their class needs, is being put at the risk of their salary. I think lastly here as well, on the competition for teachers, there is no competition here. Teachers both want to get onto high brackets. I think we are going to see more collaboration from these teachers because of the fact that they do want to share content, lesson plans, because both of them want to succeed. Whether that means something like teachers collaborating, sharing resources, I think this doesn't tense the relationship. I think this is more likely to look to teachers who see high bracket teachers to ask for help, ask to see what they are doing right. I think you actually are going to see improvement, general collaboration in teachers. I'll take that, Pilar, now.
Teachers are only paid on how long they teach when they have accreditation and experience that reflects that. Why should we prioritise young people over more established teachers who might leave if we don't give them pay that reflects that? I
think that is exactly why we need these performance-based teachers. Because I think if teachers are just accredited by the experience that they get, that exactly proves the harms on why slacking off once they get those accreditations can occur. I think that's exactly the point. I think ultimately as well, I think I want to web and extend on sort of the outcomes and impacting that we give you around Alex's content, but also just add more analysis to it. I think teachers will take grades, will take students being achieving in class very seriously, and will create active involvement to help teach a student to achieve a grade, especially if it's higher, right? Because instead of the comparative, where teachers will just teach the class, the smart ones will get excellence, I just hope the class pass, we will see active involvement for teachers to try and do the extra to help the students achieve, to try and help the students raise their grades, because again, that is something that will help their performance look good. And I think secondly here as well, I think this does look like teachers becoming more connected to their students, but also inspiring their classes to enjoy the subjects and to have better class environments, because they're safer and more positive, because teachers want to make the environments less stress-free so the feedback looks good on them. I think all of these points addressed, you do get those outcomes, you do get better education, and overall, teachers get paid what they deserve. Thank you very much.
Great. I thank the speaker for the speech, and I'd now like to welcome up the second negative speaker.
You wake up at 6 to feed your kids and drop them at school before getting to work at 7:30 to go to a professional development meeting. You get home at 4:30 after picking up your kids, you make them dinner, and then you sit in bed until 11 o'clock marking work and writing lesson plans, and you still lose pay because you can't compete in such a stressful environment. This is the world that Affirming wants for our teachers. This is the point where you get far worse education and significant harms on people who are already overworked and underpaid and underrepresented. Firstly on some model tensions, then on teachers, and then on student well-being. Firstly on the model, they tell us they're going to implement these experts. Firstly, where did we whip these out from? We already don't have teachers, and we need to retain the experienced teachers who they suggest will go into these roles. But also we don't have specialists, right? Like, people don't get PhDs in overseeing teachers, right? You go into tech industries or whatever, right? And it's not a similar system to student teachers. It's very different to having a university graduate sit in a class than to have a highly professional expert overseeing another expert. But secondly, these experts are overqualified to babysit a professional, right? You must be educated to a higher level than a teacher, which already takes a lot of education, right? So now you get paid not a lot and must be very qualified to just talk to parents who don't know what they're talking about and don't know anything about education. But even if these experts do exist and they do buy into the system, why does it not work? Firstly, because you can't judge achievement off of one meeting and one interaction with a class. Because A, progress is not linear. Maybe a kid is struggling that day, but it's just because they got to sleep late that night. That doesn't represent the teacher's ability. But B, achievement is subjective, right? For example, you see a kid who is only doing some work, but at least that teacher interacts with them enough that they felt encouraged to come to school that day, because they're normally someone who doesn't engage with the system. But secondly, it incentivizes short-term prioritization, only having to get your class to engage once a month, or the other alternative is that they overwork to meet standards all the time and they just burn themselves out. But thirdly, we think it looks like experts being given a quota of you have to reduce X amount of teachers' pay by X amount, and they have to fulfill that quota. So it kind of doesn't even matter how well you perform, because the government only has so many resources. We're not going to pay every teacher 150k a year when they're constantly rioting in the status quo. What does this mean? Firstly, it's not necessary. Teachers are experts and professionals. They already go through a huge degree and expert teaching training. They know what they're doing. So we can, even if they do make mistakes sometimes, right? Let's weigh this against the cost of creating some new experts that we're whipping out of thin air, and the cost of implementing an entirely new system of supervising people. And like also like giving teachers enough, like all of this ridiculous money that we're just getting out of nowhere. But secondly, it's just actively dysfunctional, right? You just aren't accurate because you're only there once a month. And we tell you at Layla that it disproportionately targets low performing groups and like individuals who can't access the education system. They come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They don't have support from their family at home. That's really bad. So then they tell us they're going to consider grades. Look, again, they fail to consider that progress is not linear and can't always be measured by an exam. People have learning disorders. It's good that teachers can engage with them on a personal level, regardless of their achievement on a piece of paper. But secondary to this, it's just symmetrical, right? Obviously, if an entire class's grades drop when they get a new teacher, we have existing accountability mechanisms. We're not letting like teachers just sit there and like bum around on like a free government salary. I think taxpayers care about that quite a lot. But then they tell us that like they're going to interview parents as well who will know. Well, firstly, only privileged parents are the people who care enough or are informed enough to engage in their kids' education, right? Because those are the parents who don't like, maybe they have like a stay-at-home mum and she can like read with you and see that you're doing your homework, right? As opposed to like parents who work like a 9 to 5 and don't have the time to like come in and interview this expert, and like it just doesn't represent these people who do matter the most, and that the education system and like the public education system is designed to facilitate specifically. But secondly, once again, this is just symmetrical. We have parent-teacher interviews in the status quo. Why do we exclusively need to threaten teachers with the ability to not be able to feed their family? So then on the status quo, why do teachers still care on our side? Firstly, we have existing accountability mechanisms, right? People have bosses who oversee their performances. We have like marking checkers, I forgot what it's called. They don't want to lose their jobs. We have professional development sessions for teachers. The comparative is you're just threatened with not being able to like afford to live. Like again, Layla tells you that like the average teacher literally earns less than minimum wage in the status quo. When you add their hours together, we think that at the point where you're decreasing that even more is the point where you like physically can't live. But secondly, you're passionate about your job, right? You care about your kids and your subject, right? So if the status quo is really so bad, then that just means teachers are buying into the system for a reason, right? The comparative is that now you burn out from stress and it ruins your passion. Thirdly, it's symmetrical because we have the same resources, right? People still get pay rises on our side, so they still incentivize us to do a fair amount of work. So and either way, like they're still underpaid on their side of the house because it's not like we're just magically getting more money, we're just distributing it differently. So then on teachers, firstly on new teachers, they tell us that they see future possibility in the industry. Firstly, we aren't talking about like CEO billion-dollar salary incentives here, right? It's still probably more work for like minimum wage, right? And we think progress just always is never going to outweigh the cost of student loans and like time spent in university for some like kind of abstract chance of getting a pay rise because of your performance. But secondly, they see future burnout as the reality, right? They know that they're going into this job where they're constantly under a microscope and they're constantly having to like face parent scrutiny when they don't know what they're talking about. But thirdly, at the very least, it's just hugely uncertain. Like why would that your pay could go up, but it could also go down. So for a young a university graduate who's trying to find like stability in their life, trying to find a job where they know they can put like a down payment on a house together, they're not going to go into a job where they know that they could just simply lose all of that benefit for like some kid with ADHD who doesn't look good to the expert. What this means is they just go elsewhere, they do like private tuition or go to a better industry. Then on existing teachers, they say that they're likely to stay. Why is this not symmetrical? Because we still get promotions on our side, there's still progression that happens, and they still want to stay because they care about their job. So why are they more likely to stay on our side? Firstly, because they don't burn out, and secondly, because they have more passion, they have freedom to have a fun environment and enjoyment. But also because they're not competing against other teachers. They tell us that they'll collaborate, but no, there's only so much pay to go around. You have to look out for yourself. So then on student well-being, which will be my substantive contribution. Look, they tell teachers' roles extend beyond achievement, right? It looks like being a mentor and a role model and a support system for these kids. It looks like being a coach or a director or a debating teacher. Why does this harm the student then? Firstly, because you're going that extra mile is too big of an opportunity cost. You're already overworking to get paid enough. Now you have to do it even more, so they don't have the time to take on extra responsibilities or go the extra mile to talk to that student and say, hey, how's your home life? But secondly, teachers are overly interested in your achievements, right? This means class is less fun, you get more homework, boring classes, no time to chat or connect with your teacher. But thirdly, teachers are incentivized to prioritize the majority, which are the most likely to achieve. This looks like giving less attention to like kids with learning needs or kids who don't engage with the system because, oh well, they're probably going to drop out anyways. But fourthly, they're actively incentivized to neglect those kids because why would you engage with a kid who's going to drop out anyways, who's going to cost you money? You may as well just like not bother or actively dissuade them from participating, because if they're not in their class, you can't get marked down. What does this mean? You get less support for the kids who struggle the most, but secondly, you get less engagement in the education system.
Great, I'd like to thank the second speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the third.
We win this debate when we prove that NEG doesn't actually look after teachers more, it looks after the wrong teachers. A couple of things in the speech. Firstly, on the functionality of implementing this, and then secondly, on teacher harm. But before I go into that, some framing. Firstly, on why is it effective? We tell you that multiple verification methods mean that it is not based on like one thing or only partly representative. Note this for later on, this is going to be important in my functionality clash. Secondly, we tell you that teachers are monetarily incentivized, so they are likely to want to improve if it means better pay, even if this is marginally. We want teachers to improve because this improves the education system and improves the benefits that we get to the kids in the system. Secondly, what do good teachers look like? Firstly, we tell you that like good teachers can work with multiple student types. They cater to all different types of students. They use good resources. They actively care for, work hard, and pay attention to their students, and they achieve improvement in like both the grades and like I think the attitude of their students as well. So what does this framing mean? Firstly, when we tell you that it is effective, it means that it gives an accurate representation of good teaching. Therefore, you should buy that we are able to identify who will best improve the education system, and implementation are able to achieve this. This is important for the debate because education is like the most important thing in weighing, because the goal of employing teachers is to educate like children to the best degree possible. Okay, so firstly on functionality. NEG tells you that there are external factors like teaching style or like the kid's background, like parents who don't care, and like this affects it. Firstly, we tell you that this is why the evaluation is like multi-method. It's not just like the grades. For example, like we've got like the other things like parents talking to teachers. If the parent isn't able to talk to a teacher, then we have like the supervisors coming in and like potentially talking to the students and being like, why are you finding it really hard? Why are you struggling with this? Like the goal of the system is to engage with the students and find out either why they aren't improving or how they can improve more. Intuitively, this is going to mean that we're not just like basing it off one method. It's going to be as good as possible. Secondly, we tell you that this is good because we can identify what teaching styles are beneficial, particularly to different kids. We can figure out what teaching styles like aren't working or might be outdated, or we might figure out what teaching styles aren't working for kids who are neurodiverse, which we tell you is becoming increasingly more prevalent. Thirdly, we tell you that this is good for identifying and helping kids who need special support that previously may not have been identified. For example, neurodiverse kids that have not been diagnosed yet, or like don't have like a particular like support system to help their learning. This is really good for improving the education system in general. And secondly, they claim that improvement is subjective. Firstly, we tell you this is why grades are only compared within a student's own results. We're not comparing across a class because we understand that different people are good at different subjects or they have like different capability in different areas. We're talking about the trajectory of like a student's own grades, whether they're improving over time, whether they're staying the same, or whether they're getting worse over time, which may be due to the teacher's performance. Secondly, this is why we also have like a parent input. Who knows the children best apart from the teachers that are working with them every day? It's their parents. So if parents know that something else is happening in the children's life that might be barring them from like improving in a subject, this is why they're able to talk to the teachers and to talk to the supervisors in these like termly meetings or whatever, which is able to help like the supervisors flag why the improvement might not be happening and like whether or not this is involved in like the teacher's performance. They also claim to you that neurodiverse kids look bad in routine checks, and potentially teachers might maybe neglecting them because they know that it doesn't make them look good. Firstly, we tell you this isn't true. These supervisors will be aware of the nature of the kids in the class. They probably have a briefing of who's in the class or whether any of them are neurodiverse before they go into a classroom to supervise it. They're going to know which kids might look like different ways or might act different ways in different classroom settings. I think they're aware of this and they can talk to the teacher about this. They're not going to make assumptions about kids without talking to the teacher or talking to the kid first. Secondly, we tell you this isn't the only evaluation of performance, which is another reason why if this doesn't work, we have other methods to back this up. And thirdly, I think the system can help peer teachers with kids who suit the learning style best, which means that we have teachers who are working with the kids that will need the improvement most, rather than having peer ups that don't actually work or are beneficial to either people. Thirdly, they claim that teachers aren't always liked by parents, and students may lie, which may sway the perception that a parent has of a teacher. Firstly, we tell you this is not the majority of teachers or the majority of parents or the majority of students. Most students don't outright lie to their parents about what's going on in class. Therefore, the majority of parents actually have an accurate representation of what their teachers look like. I think this is a minority, but even if this is true, this is why other factors exist. Again, we have so many verification methods. We're not relying on one thing, so if one doesn't work, we have other things to back it up. And then thirdly, when students lie, it becomes obvious to higher ups like the principal or the supervisors. And if other classmates are talking about it, I think it's really hard for a student to get away with a massive lie that affects their performance so much. It's going to be picked up by something in the system, and it's going to be linked to the student themselves rather than the teacher's performance. So I think clearly on that point of fashion functionality, we prove that it can work, and any of their material trying to attack us is backed up by the multiple methods that we have in place, and the fact that we actually get exclusive benefits to neurodiverse kids because we're able to pair them up with teachers that will suit them best. Secondly, on teacher harms. They tell you that teachers are overworked and underpaid. Firstly, NEC doesn't actually solve this. Teachers are underpaid and overworked in the status quo, especially the young, talented and good ones who aren't looked after by the system. At least on our side, we pay the teachers who are actually hardworking and doing these things. I think the perception that they have of the group of teachers is really off. I'm going to paint this for you now. We have the old teachers who have been in these jobs for a really long time. They have the really great pay, so they literally have no incentive to get to improve because every year they're just going to stack up higher pay. They're not the hardworking ones. They're the ones that just kind of turn up every day and do their job and they just get paid. The really hardworking, overworked teachers that are staying up until 11 o'clock grading their students are the ones that want to improve but don't actually get paid for this. They're the ones that are overworked. And I think our system better addresses them. Therefore, we get those teachers actually getting paid for the work that they're doing, and then we get the teachers that aren't actually working hard prompted to either leave the career because it's obviously not for them, or they actually get work harder to get better so that they are able to maintain the pay that they've become so used to during their careers. Secondly, they tell you that pay is less certain. Firstly, we tell you that for this to be convincing, they must prove that many teachers are fighting paycheck to paycheck and have sufficient stress for us to be impactful. Our model is based off the existing pay bracket. Under the status quo, a large amount of teachers aren't actively starving. We tell you that yes, it's not an ideal career if you want Coach bags or really expensive belongings, but teachers get by just fine. I think particularly tying back to the young teachers material that I just gave you, these young teachers who are the underpaid ones that don't have the means are the ones that don't have comfortable lives set up because they're early on in their careers. Therefore, they're the ones that need the money most to be able to set themselves up for their future lives. I think it's the most important to address them, and I think it's the most important to give them the pay that they're actually deserving of for the work that they've done. Alright, so how do we win this debate? We prove that the status quo doesn't look after the right teachers. We prove that on our side we benefit the right teachers. We attract the good ones to these jobs. We prompt the ones that aren't working hard to work harder. Therefore, we better the education system, and that's why we actually win this debate, because we cater to the students that need it most. We get the right teachers in these jobs. We're able to solve the problems in the education system, and we have clear functionality on our side of the house that actually works in implementation. NEC's attacks to this don't stand, our case still stands, and therefore we win this debate.
Okay, I thank the speaker for their speech, and I'd like to welcome up the third negative speaker.
AF fails to win this debate when they fail to acknowledge the fact that all teachers are hardworking, all teachers are putting in their hours every day, helping their students, doing the best of their ability to get their students over the line, to get their students to be successful. Our benefits come when teachers aren't burnt out, they're paid adequately, for what they should be being paid, and vulnerable students are actually helped. I'm going to go through 2 points of clash, firstly on vulnerable students, and then the most important one about how education quality decreases on their side. So first on vulnerable students, they said that neurodiverse students are more accounted for because teachers are more incentivized to help them do better. Teaching is a low-paying job no matter what. All of our mecs on this have been unresponded to predominantly when we said how even with hundreds of teacher strikes, the government still refuses to adequately raise teacher wages. So where are they suddenly getting all this money from to be paying these teachers just more and more? No, it's more likely that some teachers will be getting paid more and others will be getting paid far less when teachers are already earning less than minimum wage and hourly rate. We do not stand for where there are just more teachers getting paid less and less. So because it's a low paying job no matter what, in either debate, you do as someone as a potential teacher, you do not want to spend ages at uni learning to cater to these few neurodiverse students, and especially because neurodiversity presents itself differently in so many different ways. You're also gonna as a average reasonable voter, you're probably gonna know this. You're not gonna want to waste your time spending these extra years of your life learning to cater to these people that all present themselves in different ways anyway. What does this mean? This means that even if you do spend all this time, you're unlikely to be able to go into a school that you've never worked in before and suddenly be able to help all of these disenfranchised kids. So what does this mean? This means that teachers are just going to focus on the smartest kids, the most privileged kids, the ones that already have the self-motivation to go home and study every day, the ones that have the parents that buy into the education system and encouraging their children. No matter how much you like teaching, you're still going to want money, you're still incentivized by money, and when the smart privileged kids are the ones getting you money, those are the ones you're going to focus on. So you therefore focus on those already exceeding because it gets you a higher income, and therefore not in those groups fall further behind. Not only in each class a teacher isn't going to focus on the students individually, but also on a wider scale. This looks like not wanting to teach in low income areas, even if you don't believe this material at first and why there's just less teachers in general. It's still pretty intuitive that you're not going to want to why would you want to go teach in some super low income area that historically has terrible school results when you know that means you're just not going to get paid as much. Teachers are probably incentivize money to a large degree, and probably to a point where that is going to outweigh their passion for teaching when it comes to whether they can afford dinner at the end of the day or not. This means they're not going to teach those low income areas. That means that even if you don't believe that there's as a whole less teachers, you can believe that there's less teachers in these low income areas. This means that these most vulnerable people, the people that the impact affect them most severely, are the ones that are impacted in this debate. They're the ones that have bigger class sizes. This means there's less one-on-one time with the teacher. This means that they don't buy into the system because they're if I go to school, there's 40 other kids in my class and a teacher that doesn't really care, then you're not going to want to buy in. You don't turn up to school. This just means you're going to have a lower quality of learning, and it's a less extreme impact. It looks like teachers predominantly focus on pushing the smartest kids because they need money, and it's the easiest way for them to earn this money. Comparatively, teachers get paid a flat rate. They can focus on the vulnerable people because they can focus on their passion. Note that when your and your family's livelihood is determined by whether you focus on neurodivergent kids that aren't going to succeed that much in your class because you don't know how to properly help them, or if you just push the smartest kids that already have other tools to help them, you're going to weigh your income over your passion for teaching. On our side, there's proportionate care for those that actually need it. Teachers can actually use their passion to help those that they care about. I'll take it from you.
If the only teachers left in the system are old people who have no idea at all how to deal with neurodiverse kids, why are they going to be benefited on your side of the house?
I'm gonna go into more about how like I feel like it's kind of weird as 3 kids that are in a school. You guys seem to be so against the teachers that are working currently. I think there's still like learning opportunities for teachers to learn to deal with kids. I also don't think that any university course you tend to like spend a year getting like a year's more of student loan is going to necessarily teach you how to deal with such a diverse range of like kids and like issues. Like it's always like student to student based, and I don't think you can ever like claim that you get like perfect teachers that can deal with all kind of students. And then even if like as a teacher you know how to deal with like a kid with severe ADHD, it's still easier for you to focus on the kid that also is a private tutor outside of school. That's still going to get you more money. Even if you know how to do it, it's still a lot more effort than you. You're still not getting paid that much, and that's still more effort you're putting in for less money. Like at the end of the day, it's just easier, so they're more likely to do that. Okay, on to the second point of clash. So they said that like it gives an incentive to improve and that current teachers are lazy. Like how they characterize, teaching is a low-paying job. People enter it because they like it, because they're passionate about it. Current teachers are not as lazy as they want you to believe. If they hate their job so much, then like if said at first, they're just gonna quit. This is symmetrical. Or like Ollie said as well, there's still accountability measures. Like if like a class like that's been doing pretty well goes to this like old teacher and then they all start failing, like that teacher is not just going to be allowed to keep on bumming around. The status quo has checks and balances. There are performance reviews. You're going to get fired if you're awful, or there's just like it's still going to be checked. So I think it's completely unfair to say that just like all teachers now just suck and like hate teaching. So secondly, like improvement doesn't matter when like improving as a teacher doesn't matter when the class doesn't respond. Like you're paid on like the student's performance, not your own. This means that like you only improve teaching for those that are already ahead. Like I've already explained this in my speech and it's been explained down the line. And B, you're just like unfairly paid because students have external factors that mean that they don't do well. This is obviously going to incentivize you to like continue improving and bettering your teaching style when you're not seeing any benefits from all these extra hours you're putting in helping these kids. You're not getting paid anymore. And then thirdly, like you're just burnt out. This has been explained down the line. Like A, it's just uncertain pay. This can lead to stress. And then B, it's just like hopelessness of like there's no use having a perfect lesson plan if no student is showing up. Note that a lot of the time this is outside of the teacher's control. Like if no kids are in your class, it doesn't matter if you have a perfect lesson plan, it doesn't matter if you're ready to engage with these kids because no one's there. This is out of your control. This is where you feel burnt out. This is when you don't even want to show up to class because no one else is anyway. Your pay is going down because the teacher next to you in the school got a better class that's more like, that buys in more to the education system. This is when you're angry at the principal. This is when you're angry at the school. This is when you're angry at the system. This is when you're burnt out. This is when you don't care. And fourthly, like the whole stuff about how you don't get paid more when you're head of the department. Who's going to want to be the head of department then when A is an experienced teacher, the newest teachers are like getting paid more than you, and B, like it's just extra work for no money. Who wants to go home and like organize the curriculum for head of departments if you're not getting paid anymore? This doesn't make any sense. This is just stupid. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that on our side, at our worst, there's some lazy teachers. Note that not even minimum wage, note that if they're not even getting paid minimum wage, why are they dealing with whiny teenagers when you're probably going to get paid more as a manager at McDonald's? Like these lazy teachers are not staying teaching. This doesn't make any sense. So this means they either leave or they're just held accountable through performance reviews. At their side, at best, some percent of teachers work pay off and they like feel empowered, but then most just feel burnt out and they're still like getting low. They're still like low income. This means they have a larger scale of burnout, but burnt out teachers compared to our possible lazy ones. And on severity, like a lazy teacher may not actively improving, they're still showing up and must care somewhat, otherwise they're fired. This means that maybe they're less strict. This means that kids feel less pressured in their class, and yes, results may not be that good, but maybe more students show up because it's like chill. Why is this good? Because a student showing up is one of the most important parts of improving in school. They're still buying into the school system, they're passively learning. Like on the comparison, the burnt out teacher doesn't care, the kids therefore don't care, they take more days off, the subs don't teach, the teacher doesn't buy in, so the students are buying in, the students don't turn up, and quality of learning is worsened.
Also, I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and welcome up the negative reply speaker.
Is it just the model stuff? Yeah, I got it.
both sides can agree that teachers have it pretty rough in the status quo. So when the affirming team makes their lives so much harder and makes them constantly feel like they could be struggling to put food on the table, they disengage in even more. Our teacher crisis gets even worse. These people are already struggling. Let's support them. So I think at third F, it's sort of the affirmative case boils down to just teachers. So firstly on like future teachers, and then on teachers who already exist. Look, they tell us that like it's appealing. We sort of tell you down the line that these incentives just aren't that extreme, right? We have a set budget for teacher wages. If the government isn't willing to extend this in the status quo, I don't think they ever will be, to the extent that the affirmative team claims at least. But secondly, the more likely image for a future teacher is that they see the burnout, they see the struggle, they see getting babysitted and constantly being under a microscope. But thirdly, at least they very much see the uncertainty of going into that career that is not in the interest of a new graduate. But I think more importantly, the case boils down to teachers who work hard deserve to be paid high. Look, we tell you down the line, with actual structural reasons, by the way, why all teachers work hard. But now, on the affirming side, they work too hard, and secondly, it comes at the cost of other hardworking teachers, right? Because it has to balance out. Like, this just means that you get this toxic work environment, but more importantly, like, even if this is a good benefit, it's just symmetrical, right? Because we still reward good teachers with promotions and pay rise on our side of the house, and these people still have passions for their job. Comparatively, there is a cost of implementing the system. There's the cost of rewarding wrong teachers because it doesn't work. There's the cost of harming learning because you disincentivize actual good teaching. There's the cost of harming students who disengage with the system because teachers aren't catering for them, but having to fight to be able to put food on the table for their family. And there's the cost of teachers feeling disenfranchised from a teacher that never supported them. Look, but at the end of this, it's just unclear what the benefit even is of rewarding teachers who work hard, right? Because maybe we're implying that some teachers just bum around. Well, what is the problem with that? When we're in a crisis and we don't have enough teachers, we need people in classrooms so that we can have students at school, as opposed to out and like just being antisocial. That's still a benefit. We tell you that if this is their only positive material, then we should still win there. But no, that all of this material is also contingent on their model being valid, which we tell you down the line it isn't. Because firstly, experts just don't exist at this level. But secondly, even if they did, they're overqualified to get underpaid to like babysit some already existing professional, by the way. They have degrees. But thirdly, it's not effective because progress isn't linear and achievement is subjective and vulnerable to bias. You can't assess it in one meeting. But fourthly, that they just have criteria that they have to hit. This looks like having a quota of how much pay you have to reduce. Look, they try to supplement this with like having grades, which we tell you down the line again, don't represent performance fairly for structural reasons. But even if they did, it's just symmetrical, right? We still assess grades. Teachers still face accountability mechanisms if everyone in their class is failing. But then they tell us like, oh, we have parents. Well, we tell you again that they're uninformed and only like the privileged kids get represented by their parents. And once again, it's symmetrical. So at the end of this, you waste money on a dysfunctional system that unfairly represents the privileged students while disenfranchising the kids who matter the most. But also, it doesn't even fairly reward teachers in the way that they claim because it is so subjective and it is so inaccurate. So all of their material must fall out there. In that case, even if you believe that these are close margins in these points of clash, we uniquely bring you material on student well-being because students disengage in the system when teachers are actively disincentivized to have conversations with them and to get to know them. They lose connection, they lose support, kids just don't show up to school on the affirming side of the house. We think that that's a unique benefit that they don't contend with at all.
Also, I thank the speaker for the speech, and I'd like to welcome up the affirmative reply to close off the debate.
teaching as an industry completely stagnates without development. If we keep on barring new teachers from entering the career and we let these lazy teachers get away with just being able to laze around because of the fact that we're understaffed already, it doesn't develop and we don't get to see any benefits for the kids that we want to educate. Okay, 2 things in my reply. Firstly on the model and lastly into the engagement on the education system. So what do we get from the model? And I think I'll try and split this up into the supervisors, grades and parents, but also give you a final outcome on it. So supervisors, what can we've given you mechanization, we've given you the fact that supervisors already exist for teachers who are learning how to be teachers, the fact that the accountability mechanisms themselves exist, mean that this industry, this career, this area does exist, meaning it can be expanded. It means it is feasible to expand and to become into a real thing. And it also means that we are creating incentives to become those high experience, high paying, high bracket teachers, because once you get to that point, you can likely earn more money by becoming one of these supervisors. I think second here then on grades. I think grades, the quote that grades aren't just linear is untrue because of the fact that student trajectory isn't, grades are indicative of success, but also when done over a whole class margin, but also, and when flagged with the fact of your ability to look at the parent's opinion as well. I think the grades, grades isolated maybe might not be an important metric, but when put in with the metric on supervisors going into school, looking at what issues students might be having, looking at what parents have to say about the teachers, this is when it does become indicative. And the fact that parents don't care is completely untrue because parents do care if their student is struggling and if it's the teacher's fault. Parents do want to put their opinion across to these supervisors. Parents want to feel as if they have a voice. And I think ultimately the multiple verification methods we've given you can give accurate predictions. And an important analysis here is even if they're not 100% perfect all of the time, the fact that we are consistently doing them, consistently making sure, reviewing these teachers means that there is less potential for something to go wrong because those small flaws can be fixed as the cycle continues, right? It means you do get those fixes. It does mean that system is accurate. And I think that does mean you can properly base performance. And it also creates that incentive. I think a sub point here as well was around incentivizing new teachers, because it's funny how NEG talks about the current understaffing when they give no explanation as to how they plan to fix it. Because at least in our model, we gave you the first year salary, meaning that teachers don't have to start from ground zero. These vulnerable teachers who have the lowest pays, the lowest incentive to get into the teaching industry won't be incentivized in the current status quo where you start at nothing. Instead, at our first year salary, you have the ability to experience life as a teacher. I think this alone is debate winning because of the fact that you have these teachers incentivized to get into the industry. I think secondly then on the engagement, and I think students are I think teachers do make that effort to connect with students. I think without it, students don't choose to go to school. If students don't feel seen, if the overall class does not feel engaged with, students don't go to school. You don't get those student well-being benefits. You do get those lazy teachers because they just assume that because because schools are already understaffed, they can't be replaced. Because once you're accredited, you cannot be re-reviewed again, and it means you can just look good for the once a year performance review that just comes by. It doesn't mean you do get those lazy teachers. It's unfair and it's unfair to assert that you just fit like these lazy teachers. All teachers work hard, and I think that is very important because the current education system is relatively dysfunctional already. So even if you don't buy our best case where we improve all of it, we still win on our worst case because we at least still pay the overworked, passionate teachers better than NEG do. Thank you very much.
I thank both teams for a great debate and invite you to cross the floor and take If someone could pass me my laptop, I think that would be easier. Or maybe just turn on the screen.
Maybe we do like a pass the parcel.
Oh yeah? Yeah. Oh guys, 25 viewers. I had 39 in my last video.